Yes, sir. Or whatever, whoever has the mic, I guess. I'm sorry.
I think a lot of people have a misconception about the scale of the French and Indian War versus the scale of the Revolutionary War. A lot of us, I think of in terms of French and Indian War as being much smaller by nature. And I think, at least historians have put forward that the onus of defending the British colonies here in America put a special onus on us to be taxed. Can you speak to that?
Well, it is the first war of the series of wars that Steve mentioned between France and Great Britain, where the main theater of the war was North America. But it is a world war, and you may know more about it takes place throughout the whole world. And so in that sense, I think it is a terrific burden and gives a sense of release that the colonists now feel they're free of the French and they're going to be a little more independent. And I think the British government feels the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to think of, I mean, I think it is, in this case, the name matters. I think it is important to realize that it's really the 7 Years' War, and it was a global war, which started in North America. It was about Western hemispheric issues, but it was fought on a global scale. So, I mean, many of you have seen a map of what the status of North America looked like before the French and Indian War broke out, that in fact the North American British colonies are surrounded by French territory. The same map could be reproduced in India. Britain has these little footholds at Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta, surrounded by a series of French allied states, indigenous states, and French control. And there's a massive war which takes place in India. And equally, on the continent of Europe, there's a massive and incredibly expensive war. France is able to bring into the field hundreds of thousands of men. And they threaten, it's important to realize that George II and George III are not only kings of Great Britain, they're electors of Hanover as well. They threaten the elector of Hanover's territories. This is a massive, massive, massive war, an incredibly expensive war in Europe. And it's also an expensive war fighting not only in North America, but in the West Indies as well. So it's an incredibly expensive war on an unbelievable scale. So if you actually look at British expenditures in the war, it's much, much higher in the 7 Years' War, the total amount of expenditures, than it is for the American Revolutionary War. It will only be surpassed in British history in the 1790s with the French Revolution.
And you know that 7 Years' War is actually, from the American point of view, is a 9 Years' War.
Well, it's a 9
It
Years'
started
war.
in 1754 with George Washington's little venture out into what is now Lake Erie area. So, but the French aren't ready to go to war yet until 56, and so it becomes, from the European point of view, a 7 Years' War. But from our point of view,
no, it starts much
American point of view, would say 9 Years' War. Now, I know there are other questions. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead. We can repeat it.
In French, I'm not going to argue in favor of civil law, although the fight is still going on. But no, I would like to ask you a question. You have mentioned all the arguments. When is for you the moment when there was a massive shift, not in the American political class, but in the public opinion, from loyalism to total independence? When that took place in relation with the tax elements?
Well, my own view is that it's when the coercive acts are passed. The feeling everywhere is this is too much. And unless the British withdraw those coercive acts, this empire is going to fall apart. Now, they don't say that, except privately. You get some sense of this, certainly someone like John Adams. But we're talking about 1774. Now, there's still many, many colonists who want to hold the empire together, especially in the middle colonies. And there are desperate efforts to do that. John Adams goes to the Constitutional Convention, which is called in 1774, and that is a very important moment because it's, for the first time, they're coming together to talk about these issues. since 1765 with the Stamp Act Congress. And Adams realizes that he's got to be careful. He's given some advice by a group of Pennsylvanians. It's called the Frankfurt Advice in his mind, which says, cool it. You guys from Massachusetts, to use modern lingo, cool it. You guys are going too far, too fast. We got to bring these others along. And I think the Massachusetts people and many of the radicals are ready to break right then. But they realize they've got, politically, you've got to bring along the people who are doubtful and scared and actually have a lot of affection for the crown and believe, like John Dickinson did, that if you break this tie, we're going to bleed at every vein. I mean, he really did believe that the empire and being English was important. So there's a lot of hesitation, but so you have a wide range of opinion, but I think the coercive acts are crucial. Then, of course, when you have Lexington and Concord in April of 1775, even though the empire is not broken, boy, that's pretty serious when you're fighting. And Washington certainly pays allegiance, toasts to the king, even though he's leading a siege of Boston in the summer and fall of 1775. And the break doesn't come until a year later, as you know. But I think my own feeling is 1774 is the crucial series of events, the coercive acts.
Can I just sort of add from a European perspective? I completely agree. I mean, I've been doing work, I'm going through the Marquis of Rockingham's papers and the papers of the Earl of Shelburne, two extremely important Whig politicians. And their view, and I should say, I want to add something with a specific French perspective on this because I'm very proud of this work that I've been doing recently. From their view, the coercive acts marks the end because from that point forward, they think their American allies no longer feel that they can do business with Parliament. I mean, it's at that moment that they start talking about their relationships with the king, not with the imperial Parliament. And their view, from a Whig point of view, is once that happens, the relationship is broken. Because Parliament is absolutely central to their notion of liberty. And once they're appealing to the king, it's at best the second best. It's at best a relationship somewhat like the Irish relationship with the British Empire, and that's not going to work. And it should be said, I mean, so from the French perspective, I mean, I've been reading, in fact, I have to go in a week, back to the Ministère des Affaires étrangères, and from the perspective of the French diplomats, who are writing about this, and there's also some material in the Archives Nationales from the consuls, they also see 1774 as this key moment when the British, I mean, their view is, you know, with a certain amount of glee, that the British Empire is going to fall apart. But I think there is this this perspective that 1774, up until then, there was a possibility that the Whigs would regain control. They'd actually repealed the stamp. I mean, they'd done all this sort of repealing, that there was some hope that the imperial Parliament could resuscitate the Union. But from 1774, that the coercive acts get through Parliament despite vociferous protests from the Whig leaders. I mean, people like Cobham, Camden gives these incredibly bitter attacks, not only in the House of Lords, but also publicly on the streets of London, and it doesn't get anywhere. They just think that there's no way you can do business.
Yeah, the English nation is divided, and so that when the war actually breaks out, the Rockingham Whigs, the central Whig, they cannot agree to independence. They're in favor of the break, because if they are in favor of independence, they cannot agree to an accommodation which would make the crown central. See, the whole Whig philosophy is based on anti-monarchical feeling, and so the Rockingham Whigs actually argue for independence. Because the Carlisle Commission, any of the accommodations that are going to be made would tie the colonies to the crown. And it is, after all, a royal empire. And any enhancement of crown power is just an anathema to a good Whig, right? And so it's this curious situation. Pitt, of course, and Chatham and the Chathamites are very much in favor of crown power and strong army and all of that. They're the hardliners in that sense and they're not at all upset about crown power. But that really divides the nation. through the whole war, and North is really trying to hang on with a divided opposition, which enables him, I think, to hang on. But he wants to resign, and George III is the real hawk, I think, isn't he? He doesn't want to break up this empire. He writes this marvelous letter to North. He says, what will happen? It's kind of a domino theory of the empire. Well, if we go, then if the North American colonies go, then the West Indies, then Ireland, and this poor little island will be left all alone. Of course, he didn't realize that the British Empire would have, the second British Empire would have even a more glorious flourishing than the first empire.